Hi, welcome to our first assessment video. And the reason why I like to do these assessment videos is primarily because I know that sometimes when you're talking with people you get different information, so I hope that this kind of acts as a place to always go back to. If you have questions, you come back here to this video and hopefully that can answer some of your questions. Well, there will be a forum that you can ask questions. Ideally, if you can come here first, have a look, and hopefully that will give you some guidance. It also helps for those who tend to wait till the last minute on the weekend when you don't have the opportunity to see your tutor. You can actually come to this and hopefully get some answers. So this again is assessment task 1. Now assessment task 1 is about creating, describing, and evaluating an assessment technique. And it's worth 60%. So this first assignment is worth more than your second. And that's primarily because by the end of the semester, things get so busy. And I think this is a really important, very practical assessment task. So the first thing that you have to decide is what kind of assessment you want to create. Because in this unit, I try to give you options and choices. So the first one is you can create an assessment based on one of the following techniques. Either a 20-question quiz, which is a mixture of multiple choice and short answer. And in that regard, someone asked me, do you have to have, 10 of multiple choice, 10 of short answer? Not necessarily, but you do have to have a mixture. So you need to show that you can use more than just multiple choice or more than just short answer. So a mixture, however you want that to happen. So this 20-question quiz assesses students' understanding at the end of a unit. Now that's important because this will then tie into your purpose, which we'll discuss later. The second one, if you decide you don't want to do the quiz, you can do an authentic assessment task, which you will learn more about, I believe, in week 3. An authentic assessment task that assesses students' progress in the middle of a unit. So it's already kind of decided when, and in some ways it's kind of hinting to the purpose. And so you need to create it based on that purpose. So you'll create this assessment task, and also in week 4 you'll have a chance to kind of trial your assessment task, which is always a really important thing to ensure it's valid. So make sure that you start thinking about this, start creating an assessment task so that you can get some feedback on that. The second thing that you need to create, so I think that's worth 30%, we'll go to the rubric in a minute, 30% of your overall mark. And then the next part, 20%, is creating a marking rubric or scoring guide that explains what is being assessed. Now the difference in a lot of ways between a marking rubric and a scoring guide is a marking rubric, obviously you're very familiar with because we have a lot of them within education in university. But a scoring guide, for example, if you have, it's very clear that there's a correct answer. So you might have something particularly for a quiz, would probably more likely have a scoring guide than a marking rubric. But if you're doing a writing task, you'd have a marking rubric. So that's again a decision you have to make of which one is appropriate. And in this marking rubric or scoring guide, you need to specify, how much each question or section or task is worth. And we'll talk more about that next week when we talk about multiple choice questions and scoring and so on. Now in your discussion paper, and I put approximately 1,500 words. Now this may come in a little bit under. Last year we had about 1,000 words and students really struggled to stay within that 1,000 words, so we've kind of lifted it. So really we're looking at anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 words. And you'll find you'll need that to answer all these questions. So basically in this discussion paper, this is kind of letting you think aloud in why you created it. So describing it, describing the assessment task, and then evaluating it. So describing, first of all, the purpose of the assessment task, and things like how does it inform teaching and learning. So that's really, where does it fit within the teaching and learning and assessment cycle? Where does it fit and why? What is the purpose of it? And describing that, discussing that. Also giving the context. Context is extremely important. A lot of times we think if we create an assessment task, it's one that we will keep forever, but you have to create an assessment task based on who your students are and what you're actually what data or evidence you're trying to get out of it. And it also needs to link to the curriculum. So I've mentioned in the task description the Victorian curriculum. Now, if you have a reason, maybe you're thinking about going to a school that uses the Australian curriculum, please come and talk to me or send me an email, and I'm happy for you to do the Australian curriculum. But if that's definitely not a sure thing, I would just stick with the Victorian curriculum. And that's where you need to actually identify the content descriptors and the achievement standards that your assessment task is addressing. And then you need to discuss how you're going to report student achievement. How will you give feedback to the students? How will you report this to the school and also to parents? And finally, you're evaluating your assessment task with the test principles. And of course, we've talked about this in week 1, and we'll continue to talk more about things like validity, reliability, authenticity, and practicality, but you'll actually evaluate your assessment task. Now, know that your assessment task will never be perfect and have all of those test principles, but you need to understand and be able to discuss, what areas your assessment task is strong and which other areas may be a bit weak. Okay, just looking at the rubric, the first criteria is again the actual assessment task. And just a few things I want to note on here. Of course, part of it is making sure that the assessment task is valid and reliable and so on, and relevant to the target student population, which you get to justify in the following sections. But just checking to ensure that the task is actually a valid and a good assessment task. But more so, interestingly, if you look at the criteria for an HD compared to a D, there's an extra thing, and it says each section has clear instructions with examples if appropriate. So just doing those extra things to make sure that the assessment task is very clear and reliable and so on. So I think the difference between an HD and a D is always really hard, because a D is a very good assessment task, but an HD is where I really struggle to give any feedback and saying this is an extremely, you have really thought things through and identified everything that I would identify. Where D is, it's still a very good thing, but there are still ways to improve it. And C more so, and P is more of some things that maybe were not included or unclear. And yes. Now the marking rubric or scoring guide, the big thing here is rate of reliability. So could this marking rubric or scoring guide be given to a group of scores? And is it clearly written in a way that they would give similar scores? So that's the main thing we're looking at for criteria 2. Criteria 3 is the purpose. So really giving a sense that you understand that assessment tasks do have a purpose. And so this is very much linking back to the readings. And what we're learning in this unit, so understanding that assessments do have a purpose and how it can be used to inform teaching and learning. Criteria 4 is looking at the context, so the who, the what, so looking at the Victorian. Again, if you choose to do a different curriculum, you just need to justify that to me before you go ahead and do it. Content descriptions and achievement standards, or maybe there's one, but being able to justify and actually pinpoint where it links and how it links, and then also looking at how it's reported. So I think this is just describing it in enough detail, and those links to the curriculum are very relevant and appropriate, and the marker doesn't have to do any extra work to understand why you're doing this assessment task for that context. It's very clear in criteria 4. The next part is worth 20%. So, describing the purpose is 10%, describing the context is 10%. So a bit more weight is on evaluating the assessment task and validity, reliability, and practicality and authenticity. And this is important because this is kind of where the rigor comes in that we want to know, obviously we want to know that you can create good assessment tasks. That's important for practical reasons. But we also want to know that you connected those theoretical understanding and those principles of assessment, and they are able to discuss them and demonstrate a strong understanding of these principles and concepts. Criteria 6 and criteria 7 are primarily about, criteria 6 is about the use of language, so things like spelling and grammar. Now, we all make, I make typos all the time, or I don't proofread very well. Just make sure to proofread. And then the last criteria 7 is more about literacy, so the idea of organizing your ideas. And this is obviously more so in the discussion. So C6 and C7 are more on, your written work and discussion. So referencing, you will need to reference to be able to, particularly in, you'll be referencing the Victorian curriculum, but also when you're talking about the purpose and you're evaluating an assessment task, you need to actually support this with readings from your book and potentially outside readings. And outside readings shows that you've actually read up on this outside of just what you've been given. And that's much more HD and D material when you've actually taken that extra step to do that. All right, so that is assessment task 1. If you have any questions, please make sure you talk with your tutor. If there's any kind of really curly or interesting questions, they'll probably send them to me, and I'm happy to answer those questions. So I think in the past, people really like this assessment task. It is something that you will do in your everyday kind of teacher work, and I think that this is one of the tasks that you really, learn through the assessment task. In creating this assessment, you actually learn more about assessment, and that really kind of ticks the box as assessment as learning. So, we can kind of learn through this process. All right, happy assignment writing, and feel free to contact us if you have questions.